What is up, everyone? The Disciple of the Hado finally back, and before we start, I just want to sincerely apologize for the lack of content since my last countdown. Between everything that went on in 2014 for me, the zenith of which was a move across the entire freaking country, I sadly had very little time to focus on writing and editing. But that ends this year. With 2015 still in its first month, I say we start off right with my most anticipated games forthcoming. There are a metric ton of games coming out this year, virtually all of them looking at the very least somewhat interesting. And these are the ones that I'm looking forward to the most. Same rules as last time. All games on this list must have at least a tentative 2015 release date, and since I'm an American, there may be a few games on this list that might have come out in other regions of the world already. So sit back, relax, comment with some of your most anticipated games, and enjoy the list. Something that really saddens me is the state that Capcom's put themselves in over the past few years. They become the butt of pretty much every DLC joke this side of Activision, and nearly every game that's come out under their license recently wasn't even developed in-house by them. Which is a shame, because Capcom has always been one of my favorite developers. They have so many classic games under their belt, and yet despite having some of the most recognized and beloved franchises and characters, they insist on doing next to nothing with them. So needless to say, my spirits got a nice jump when they announced Resident Evil HD Remaster. Okay, so maybe a release like this isn't immediately going to put Capcom back on top again, but come on guys, baby steps. As the name suggests, Resident Evil HD Remaster is, well, an HD remastering of Resident Evil Remake, because profiling. Although with that said, there really isn't that much else to say on this one. I mean, okay, there's a whole analog control option, a la Resident Evil 2 on N64 that they're including, and we could spend an entire video debating on whether the control scheme improves or takes away from the classic Resident Evil experience, but that's a discussion for another day. And besides, at the end of the day, it's Remake in HD. Honestly, I'd say it's pretty much all you need. You know that warm, fuzzy, somewhat explosive feeling you get when you spend years hoping a particular game would be made, and then when you least expect it, suddenly it becomes a thing? Yeah, I'm pretty sure plenty of gamers felt that way when Majoras Mask 3D got announced. Oh god, this game. I'm honestly kinda unsure where to start with this one. Ever since the release of Ocarina of Time 3D, Zelda fans have been clamoring for Nintendo to give Majora's Mask the same treatment. And why not? Majora's Mask has always been a huge fan favorite in the Zelda fandom. Unfortunately, despite the strong support for it, the likelihood of the remake actually happening seemed to diminish with each passing year. And then, all of a sudden, out of nowhere, during a completely random Nintendo Direct, boom! Majora's Mask 3D is a thing. And to be frank, I thought this was an absolutely brilliant move on Nintendo's part. They seem to get that the best way to get people excited for a game is to build it up as the last thing they would expect. As for the game itself, Nintendo's unfortunately been kinda tight-fisted on what exactly they're gonna be doing to improve the Majora's Mask experience aside from just saying that they are. Personally, I'm hoping for a more streamlined save system and maybe even a Master Quest mode, but at this point, I'm not really sure what to expect. But I think what I'm most excited for is just the fact that this remake gives newer Zelda fans, like me, a chance to play this game that, despite being praised to death, was never re-released nearly as much as other Zelda games of its time. And hey, at the very least, it just means more hugs from Crimea. You know, I honestly feel bad for Microsoft. Ever since the release of the Xbox 360, they've been so hell-bent on catering to what they feel is the hardcore gamer demographic, and nowhere was that more blatantly apparent than their E3 press conference last year. Nearly everything they showed off was either a shooter or a driving game, with anything else outside those genres looking, and in fact going on to be, mediocre at best. With one very surprising exception. Who would have thought Microsoft would have put so much support behind something like this? Ori and the Blind Forest is a Metroidvania-style 2D platformer with jaw-dropping visuals, amazing music, and a story that's equal parts epic and touching. The story revolves around Ori, a little fox spirit who's forced to fend for himself after the death of his foster mother in wake of the malevolent owl spirit Kuro. Soon after setting off, Ori meets Cien, a tiny Navi-like fairy that assists Ori in both battle and navigation. And as the game goes on, the player is apparently able to level up both of them separately, gaining new abilities that grant access to more and more sections of the forest to explore. I'm not gonna lie though, the biggest thing that drew my attention to this game was the presentation. And just from the footage here, you can probably see why. This game, for lack of a better term, is fucking gorgeous, and even Microsoft themselves seem to acknowledge this. The way they handled this game's reveal at their press conference was mind-blowing, and I will admit, by the end of the trailer, I was actually starting to get a little choked up. Shut up. Since then, I've heard nothing but good things about Ori and the Blind Forest, including that it actually has a pretty solid difficulty that ramps up a fair bit later on, which I'm totally down with because, let's be real, Nintendo hasn't exactly been scratching that itch for us recently. While this game may not have been the big system seller that Microsoft needed for the Xbox One back when it was revealed, Ori and the Blind Forest is a great sign that the company still has an eye for potential, and I'm sure that their call to put support behind this amazing-looking platformer experience is gonna pay off greatly. Oh, Squeenix. Yeah, it's no secret. Square Enix arguably took the biggest hit of all the big-name developers this past generation. Oh sure, they put out a fair number of solid handheld titles, but in terms of big-name console releases... But it looks like this year might finally start to see Square bounce back a bit. And if that's the case, the localization of Type 0 would be as good a start as any. For those of you who missed it back when it was first revealed, Final Fantasy Type 0 was a PSP spin-off of the Final Fantasy XIII series that never made it outside Japan because of the flagging PSP sales and unknown future of the PS Vita in other regions of the world at the time. But, thanks to high demand and support from the fans, Square decided to not only bring the game out of Japan, but they're going the extra mile in building it as a full HD remaster. Let's get the big caution sign out of the way right now. Yes, Type 0 does take place in the same universe that Final Fantasy XIII series does, but really the similarities end there. The story of Type 0 can best be described as Final Fantasy VIII meets, well, Avatar. It centers around a world divided into 4 nations, each defined by a crystal that strengthens its nation's affinity for a certain form of combat. At the outset of the game, the Empire of Militesi has begun a campaign against the rest of the crystal states after developing a weapon capable of nullifying the crystals of the other nations to, you guessed it, take over the world.
Of course!
You take control of Squad Zero, a special team from the Academy of Rebrum who are able to utilize magic without the need to draw on their nation's crystal, in an effort to repel the Militesi forces and re-establish peace between nations. And from there, God, a ton of shit goes down. This is Final Fantasy after all, so trying to just sum up the story would take an entire video. I can tell you this though, while this setup seems somewhat standard, the way the game handles the story is one of the biggest reasons why Type 0 has been praised so much. This is a dark game. Despite the name Final Fantasy, Type 0 handles its story in a much more mature and, well, realistic tone. At least, as realistic as you can get in a game with magic and dragons and whatnot. Personally, the element of Type 0 that interests me the most is the combat system. While Square has always been a master of turn-based combat systems, they've dabbled into other forms more than a fair share of times. And while not always successful, their takes on real-time battle systems have always been interesting at the very least. Type 0's combat system takes elements from their better real-time battle systems, Kingdom Hearts and Crisis Core in particular, and combines those with a cast of 14 controllable characters, all of whom play distinct from one another, to create a combat system that's involving for the player while still maintaining that same level of Final Fantasy spectacle and flair. My only complaint on Type 0's HD release so far, and it's not even really a complaint as much as it is a concern, is what Square is including with it. No, it's not the additions they're making to the game itself. New difficulties and the multiplayer exclusive equipment being integrated into the main game are all fine in my eyes. And I think it was a good move on Square's part to ease newcomers in what was originally a ball-bustingly hard game. Okay, why am I building this up? If you know about this game, you know exactly where I'm going with this. The Final Fantasy XV demo. Now don't get me wrong, I'm looking forward to Final Fantasy XV as much as the next guy. In fact, if it were slated for release this year, I'd probably be talking about that game right now. What I'm getting at is that I'm just kind of worried that Type 0 runs the risk of being overwhelmed by a simple demo. Type 0 is a fantastic game. I can tell you that just from the research I did for this video, and I just hope that others will be able to acknowledge it alongside the demo for Final Fantasy XV. The term I keep hearing thrown around to describe Final Fantasy Type 0 is ambitious, and you know what? I can support that. I'm glad that Square decided to ditch the old Final Fantasy Hero 13 title. Not just so it could distance itself from the 13 series, but because I just really couldn't see this relating so closely to any main series Final Fantasy game. Unless this new tone becomes the new norm, Type 0 really couldn't work as anything but a spin-off. But that doesn't make it a lesser game, it just makes it, well, different. And let's face it, for a franchise that's waning as much as Final Fantasy, a little change might be just what the series needs. And I swear this is the last HD up-res port you're going to see on this list. There's a lot of those coming out this year. Huh. Deja vu. Yeah, if you saw my most anticipated games list last year, you might remember that this game tied with Shantae and the Pirate's Curse at the time. But while Pirate's Curse made its 2014 release on schedule, HalfGenie Hero sadly has been delayed into this year. Granted, I say sadly simply because we just have to wait longer to play it, as the reasoning behind the delays are actually quite justified. More on that later, though. Shantae HalfGenie Hero is of course the fourth game in the Shantae series, and the first in the series to be released on home consoles. Yes, I know WayForward made a console port of Pirate's Curse, which was a nice surprise. But HalfGenie Hero is the first in the series developed specifically for home consoles. What does this mean exactly? Features and content, that's what! Despite how much I love the previous Shantae games, one small complaint I share across most of them is that they are a tad short. And with the increased processing power of home consoles, I seriously doubt that was going to be an issue with HalfGenie Hero. And of course you can't talk about this game without bringing up the Kickstarter campaign that helped fund it. The amount of buzz the Kickstarter for this game generated was completely real. And this is the reason for the game's delay. Even a year after the campaign's initial funding period ended, the donations just kept coming and more stretch goals were funded, which inevitably meant more development time was needed. But really, if that's the reasoning for the delays, I have no problems waiting a little longer. And since the developers themselves have pretty much all but confirmed that the game is locked for a release this year, I hopefully won't have to revisit this game on next year's list. If you've watched any of my other countdowns, you might have gathered that I love me some Star Wars, specifically Star Wars games. And easily one of my favorites in that respect is the Battlefront series. That said, despite the series' popularity, it's been a full 10 years since we last saw a fully realized main series Battlefront title. And with the cruel, heartbreaking shutdown of LucasArts, Battlefront, as well as any other Star Wars game series that deserve new installments, seem doomed to carry on their legacy simply as they stand now. And then E3 2014 happened. I will admit, when I first heard that DICE was making the new Battlefront game, I was skeptical to say the least. I mean, I don't have anything against DICE or their work or anything like that, it's just they're owned by EA. And if you've kept up with gaming news as of late, you've probably heard that they've been the subject of some interesting press over the last couple of years. But ignoring who the actual developers are owned by, the more I thought about it, the more I started thinking, yeah, that actually makes sense. Star Wars Battlefront has always been focused on large-scale battles spanning both land and air while encouraging class diversity. And last I checked, DICE's flagship franchise centers around that very style as well, just with a modern first-person perspective. Sadly, even in the months past since its announcement, details on Battlefront 3 have been curiously scarce. Hell, we've even yet to see any actual gameplay. But the developer diaries we have seen at least show that DICE isn't doing what I originally was afraid they might do, i.e. make Battlefield 5 and just slap a Star Wars skin on. They're clearly taking their time and want to pay respect to the license and the series itself. Taking time to go out and study the locations where some of the most iconic battles in the franchise were filmed is a kind of dedication that I personally feel a lot of developers have skimped out on in recent years. My only complaint from what we've seen so far is that, as of right now, the game seems like it's only going to encompass battles from the original movie trilogy. Look, I realize the prequels aren't exactly as well loved as the originals, but come on, they've got plenty of standout battles that translate fantastically into video game form, and the previous two games proved that. Hell, Battlefront 2 was almost completely centered around battles from Revenge of the Sith, and you know what? People loved it! I'm sure this will probably change as more information comes out, but it's still a small concern for me at the moment. At the end of the day, as much as I have my concerns about Battlefront 3, I also can't deny that DICE is really probably the best team for the job at this point. And who knows, their take on the series could even prove to be an unexpected breakthrough. Guess all will be revealed come this holiday season, which coincidentally is around the same time another certain Star Wars related release is scheduled. Good on you, DICE. It's back! It's finally back! Tekken is finally back! Sorry about that. Yeah, I'm not gonna lie, it feels like forever since we last saw a real new installment in the Tekken series. I love Tekken Tag 2, and I have no intention of overlooking it as a great game. But the way I see it, Tekken will always stand as a pinnacle of one-on-one 3D fighting games. And after that other game that won't be mentioned, fans like me have been anticipating this game more than ever. Now, I'm not sure if I'm alone on this, but I personally found Tekken 6 to be kinda disappointing. The story mode was executed terribly, the battle system saw a lot of awkward changes, and the online netcode was horrendous! So how are they going about fixing these for Tekken 7? Well, from what we've seen so far, the game seems to be moving away from the ground bounce and wall spot heavy style that we've seen in Tekken 6 and Tekken Tag 2, and looks to bring the series closer to the traditional style of the earlier games. In other words, all of the juggles! Another new addition is the Rage Arts mechanic. Remember the Rage system introduced in Tekken 6? You know, that mechanic that you barely ever got to use because by the time it kicked in, you were only a good hit or two away from dying anyway? Well, in Tekken 7, you'll actually be able to finally put that boost to use. By ditching it. By sacrificing the rage boost you get when your health is in critical, you'll perform an unblockable super combo. Yes, for the first time in the Tekken franchise, we are finally getting super combos. But I'm gonna be honest, the one thing I'm looking forward to most in Tekken 7, ironically, is the story. This is the final battle, the final chapter in the Mishima storyline. And even Namco themselves have confirmed that the story in Tekken 7 is going to be much darker than anything before. Tekken 4 and 6 may have had their darker moments, but you can tell just from these trailers that shit is hitting the fan this time around. And I love it! Which is why I'm especially hopeful that Namco doesn't try anything super out there with the story mode this time around. I can see and appreciate what they were trying to do with Tekken 6's scenario mode, a kind of fully 3D take on Tekken 3's Tekken Force mode, but it just didn't work. Come on, Namco, NetherRealms has pretty much set the standard of fighting game story modes. Don't be afraid to take a few cues from them. Unfortunately, all is not completely well in Tekken Land, and some controversy has arisen among fans, specifically surrounding some of the new characters. While newcomers Claudio and Katarina have been welcomed fairly easily, there are two others that fans are particularly mixed about. Most recently, there's the Arabian fighter Shaheen, and really, I'm not entirely sure what people's problem with this character is exactly. Personally, I think he's designed well, and I'm anxious to see what he plays like. But then there's Lucky. Yeah, I'm not even gonna try and pretend I don't understand why people are having a hard time accepting this character. Hell, even I wasn't exactly foaming at the mouth to try her out when she was revealed. But I feel every new character should at least be given a chance to prove themselves in the game. So, all I'm gonna say right now on the matter is, calm down and just give her a shot. Needless to say, Tekken 7 is gonna have a lot to live up to. With this being the final installment in the established storyline, I am dying to find out just how Namco is planning to send their flagship franchise off. And while they haven't announced a console release yet, I think it's pretty safe to say that they won't skimp out on us. They haven't before. Let's flash back to 2013 and the August Pokemon Game Show Tournament. We get a new trailer for X and Y, and it's a glorious love letter to the franchise, paying homage to the series' roots and how it's grown over the years. The trailer comes to an end and we're treated to a curious shot of Lucario and Blaziken facing off in a city. It's never referred back to again, and as more news on X and Y was shown off, the sequence seemed to all but fade from public conscience. Until now! Yes, the rumors were true and you are seeing this right. Pokmon Tournament is in fact a 3D Pokemon fighting game, co-developed by Nintendo and Namco. Do I really need to say more? What more would I say? Well, sadly, there really isn't that much else I can say because information on this game has been surprisingly scarce. What we do know is that with Pokmon Tournament, Namco is going for accessibility over technicality, which I can admire because I want other people to be able to play this game as much as I want to. We also know that Namco wants this game to draw from the core of the Pokemon franchise as much as possible, and are going out of their way to include everything from special moves to even Mega Evolutions. They've also said that the roster isn't going to be completely comprised of just fighting-type Pokemon, but let's be honest, they're going to make up a good majority at least. Trust me guys, I want to be able to talk more about this game, and if we knew more about it, this game could have easily taken the #1 spot. But with how little info has been released for it, especially when compared to the top two, this is the most comfortable spot I feel placing it at. Be that as it may, there is no doubt in my mind that Pokmon Tournament is going to be huge when it finally releases. But until then, the sooner we get more info, the better. 3 words. New Nintendo IP. You ever have one of those times where a new game just intrigues you so much that you become borderline obsessed with it for the next few weeks? Yeah, Splatoon was definitely that game for me after its reveal at E3. This is pretty much the game I never knew I wanted from Nintendo, because come on, can anyone really say that they saw something like this coming? Splatoon is a third-person action game that centers around a group of half-human, half-squid beings called Inklings. And let's stop right there. Squid-human hybrids. Where the hell does an idea like that even come from? But really, I can overlook that interesting design choice, because not only are the Inklings freaking adorable, their design and concept actually play into the gameplay. Leave it to Nintendo to come up with a shooter where killing the opposing players isn't the main objective, because in Splatoon, marking territory is the name of the game. The Inklings in the game are armed with weapons that fire ink, and as you've probably gathered, this is how players expand their territory. But even though it isn't the main point of a match, enemy players are still a factor, and this is where the Inkling's squid abilities come into play. Not only does a team's ink act like tar to the opposition, but you can also assume your Inkling's full squid form to travel through your own ink at blinding speeds, all while being basically impossible to spot, able to slide up ink walls, pass through chain link fences, and just become more mobile in general, at the cost of not being able to attack while in squid form. So yeah, Splatoon has been marketed as a multiplayer-focused game since its announcement, but Nintendo has also announced a full-on single-player campaign as well. While we don't know a whole lot about the story as of now, we do know that the central premise is that the city the Inklings live in is invaded by a rival race of human octopus hybrids. You think I'm making this shit up now, don't you? But what interests me most about the single-player campaign is that it combines the shooter-centric gameplay of the multiplayer with platforming. But considering that this is Nintendo, aka the king of platforming we're talking about here, I'm not worried about at least being interested in how they're going to tackle this. I don't know what else to say. It's interesting, it's unique, it's a new Nintendo IP, it's my second most anticipated game of the year, it's freaking Splatoon. Have I mentioned how much I love Namco yet? Yes, 1,000 times yes! Godzilla the Game is making its way out of Japan, and I could not be happy enough. From the moment this game was announced, it seemed all but doomed to be a Japan-exclusive release, leaving international Godzilla fans like me, an Obsidious fan, to wallow in envy. But the day has come, and Godzilla the Game has finally been confirmed for an international release. The story of Godzilla the Game is honestly one of the more interesting takes on Godzilla mythos I've seen. Basically, the Godzilla lore is pretty much the same as usual. Godzilla is mutated by atomic bomb testing in 1954, lands in Japan soon after, turns Japan into his personal playground. But rather than being killed off by a bioweapon afterwards, the Japanese go on to harness the radiation left in his wake and turn it into a new energy source, which allows them to make advances in technology ahead of the rest of the world. Fast forward to the present day, and Godzilla returns, drawn to the power stolen from him all those years ago. This not only acts as a great setup, but it also ties into the gameplay itself. As you stomp around and destroy buildings, Godzilla gradually increases in power and actually grows bigger. To what end, you might ask? Monster boss battles. Because really, what's a Godzilla anything without monster battles? Well, it would be the original movie, but I digress. Basically, the goal of each stage in the campaign mode is to destroy the environment around you until you feel you've drawn enough power to take on the monster boss at the end. Sounds simple, right? Well, if you've seen even one Godzilla movie, you know that Japan doesn't just stand around and let Big G have his way. Using a threat level meter that draws inspiration from the wanted system of Grand Theft Auto of all things, the GDF send different level of resistance to stop you. At level 1, they send your standard tanks and jets. Nothing the King of the Monsters need to pay any mind to. At level 2, they start sending the Maser tanks and maybe one of the Super X fighters after you. Alright, now this is more like it. And at a full threat level 3, well, they send in Courier. Well, that escalated quickly. So really the challenge of the game comes with finding that balance of destroying enough of the environment to power up for the boss battle while not building your threat level too high as to have the military wreck your scaly ass before you even get there. Another unique gameplay mechanic they've introduced is a cinematic camera. Not only are you given the ability to switch between different camera styles and angles to suit a given situation, but this system also influences the ending of the game. And you know what? I've never seen that in a game before. But I think what impresses me most about this game so far is just how much of a love letter to Godzilla fans it is. From the old school tokusatsu special effects, the fucking encyclopedia of monsters that make an appearance, to the fact that they chose to have 90s Godzilla as the core incarnation of Big G, because as we all know, Heisei Godzilla is best Godzilla, and just the fact that it's being released outside Japan at all, I just can't help but put it at the top of this list. This is the Godzilla game we've always wanted, ever since the release of Destroy All Monsters Melee back in the day. And while we'll always have that game in its series, Godzilla the Game is the first game that will let fans outside of Japan feel what it's truly like to take full control of the King of the Monsters and do what he does best. Cause mass destruction and obliterate anyone who dares to challenge him. And if you're not convinced yet, I'll share one more little tidbit with you. The PS4 version has online multiplayer. What else can I say? Godzilla the Game is my most anticipated game of the year, and I hope that all Kaiju fans, Godzilla or otherwise, are just as psyched for it as I am. I'm the Disciple of the Hado, and I'll see you all on the stomping ground.